Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's very good. It's very good to see all of you, especially with me and Christina being absent last week. Very good to be back with you. Glad to have the chance to go and visit the faithful brethren in Virginia and spend some time with them and try to help them in working some things out with the Martinsville group. So definitely to keep them in our prayers as that continues to progress and as they continue the work that they are trying to do out there. We're in John 21, and we're going to be picking up in verse 20. We've already gone through in discussing the conversation that Jesus has with Peter on the shores of Galilee after he has resurrected. They've been out fishing all night. He calls out, tells them to put down on the right side, and they do it. Huge catch, they bring it in. And as they're eating together, Jesus saith unto him, Peter, the third time, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me? Peter was grieved because he said unto him the third time, lovest thou me? And he said unto him, Lord, thou knowest all things. Thou knowest that I love thee. Jesus saith unto him, feed my sheep. Verily, verily, I say unto thee, when thou wast young, thou girdest thyself and walkest whither thou wouldest. But when thou shalt be old, thou shalt stretch forth thy hands, and another shall gird thee and carry thee whither thou wouldest not. This spake he, signifying what death he should glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he saith unto him, follow me. With all of this, we have been encapsulated the important elements included in the statement of follow me. A lot of people want to throw that term around. Well, you just need to follow Jesus. What does that mean? What does that even look like? Well, Jesus is giving a description of that here. Here's what it really means to follow after him. What it really means to take up your cross daily and to go after him. You have faith in this involved, but you also have obedience in that there's responsibility being placed on the part of Peter as a follower. That is, feed my sheep. You tend to my collection of people. But these two elements also have to have tied into it the connection of love. What's the motivation? Why am I wanting to follow? Why am I wanting to feed the sheep, tend to his people? You have to have love for him first. Otherwise, you're just going to be the hireling of John chapter 10, and when you see the wolf coming, you're going to run and you're going to leave the sheep behind. But even further in this discussion is it's a restating to Peter and the others that are around listening that even though you're going to have this love for me, this faith for me, this obedience for me, that you're going to tend to others, what might your reward be? Huh?
Death.
Death. Jesus symbolizes for him what death he should die so that he might glorify God. So while most people would have the mindset of, well, going through this and doing what Jesus says, if I'm really following him, everybody's just going to love me. Well, we know from just watching the life of Jesus, and then as we're going to see with the life of the apostles going through the book of Acts, that's not how this goes. So we see, again, a further switch in the mindset of Peter with this discussion, in that, okay, Peter doesn't try to argue with it. Earlier, in Matthew 16, 15 through 17, where we have Peter making the confession, he saith unto them, but whom say ye that I am? Simon Peter answered and said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus answered and said unto him, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. So even though he's making this confession, all right, you're the Christ, Son of the living God, we see the earlier stages and the earlier problems with Peter in having a real recognition of who Jesus is. Because if you really believe Jesus is the person that he says that he is, then you're not going to argue back with him. But as Jesus switches the conversation, from that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples how that he must go unto Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised again the third day. Then Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, Be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. But he turned and said unto Peter, Get thee behind me, Satan, thou art an offense unto me, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men. So earlier on, Peter would have been wanting to argue. Well, no, this can't be. This can't be accurate. But as the stage is being set throughout the life of Christ, and as it's being stated here in John 21, this is being done, or this will happen, so that God may be glorified. And you notice here in verse 23, the problem that Peter is having, that Jesus points out, thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men. You're thinking about this all wrong. You're thinking about this from the worldly standpoint and how life should go. Well, life should go in that everything's going to be pleasant, everything's going to go your way, you're going to receive blessings. But that's not necessarily the life of a Christian. Jesus mentions many times how there's going to be a lot of suffering that comes along with the Christian life. Well, okay, even with that, I need to recognize that whether I'm going through times of blessing or times of cursing, I need to savor or have the desire for the things of God, not for the things of men. And that if I'm suffering for the cause of righteousness and I'm suffering for the kingdom's sake, then God is glorified in that. So Jesus is saying to Peter here, and he's saying to us, you have been invited to follow. Nobody's being forced. And you're even being shown, here's what it's going to take. Loving him, feeding his sheep, following him, could possibly lead you to this future. So then the question is, do you want that? Peter, can you endure this? Can we endure this? It's an opportunity to count the cost. And that's what's being done for Peter, because as we get to the book of Acts, Peter is going to have a lot of weight put on his shoulders. Back in that discussion in Matthew chapter 16, the statement's made how that the keys of the kingdom are going to be given to Peter. So it is a bit of a situation kin to that of Moses and his being called out of the wilderness so as to deliver the people of God from bondage. And Moses is a good character study of the kind of leader that you want. It's kind of like what they say about politicians or politics. Anybody that's wanting to get into politics, it's got some screws loose. I don't want it. And anybody that is looking for that, you ought to be on guard. And that's what the situation was with Moses. He didn't want to go and do that. He was trying to find any possible way to get out of it and to find somebody better to go and do it. He was fully aware of his shortcomings. Well, that's the kind of person that you want. So now the situation is with Peter. All right, Peter, do you know your shortcomings? Do you know where your tendencies to get off track are? I would say at this situation, Peter's fully aware of where he can get off track. And yet Jesus says, all right, go feed my sheep. And that's an encouraging element, an encouraging point, in that even with our flaws and character defects, if we're willing to acknowledge those things, work on those things, they're not anything that would have to set us on the sidelines. And that we can still be of use inside of the kingdom. Well, that then leads Peter to ask a question of Jesus, considering the information that he's just received. Then Peter, turning about, seeth the disciple whom Jesus loved, following, which also leaned on his breast at supper, and said, Lord, which is he that betrayeth thee? Peter, seeing him, saith to Jesus, Lord, and what shall this man do? Why ask a question like this?
Takes the pressure off of you.
Elaborate. Go a little deeper.
It could be the case that Peter's feeling singled out because they're with the rest of the apostles.
Okay.
Also, he's saying this man, he's
Hold on.
Huh?
Say it louder so that the microphone can actually hear you. This is the first time ever you're speaking.
he's saying this man isn't implying that he's excluding himself.
I don't follow. No, ask it differently.
If he's saying, what shall this man do, is it implying that he's not including himself, he's excluding himself?
From what?
When he's saying, what shall this man do? I'm asking, which is he that betrayeth thee?
Oh, no, I don't think so.
Why not ask him?
Okay. What do you mean?
He's Jesus. So he knows how he's gonna die. Well, what about John? And here he beat him in a race, so he's like, he wants to know when he's gonna die.
Okay. All right, after hearing about your own death, wouldn't you be kind of curious as to, well, all right, if this is my situation, and clearly you've got some kind of special affection towards John, what's going to happen to this guy? All right. Nothing wrong with asking that. And I'm wanting to get your feedback on it because you notice two of the answers are pretty negative. And the tendency is, when a lot of people want to discuss this, it's, oh, well, Peter's having a problem again. Peter's asking questions that he shouldn't ask. He's being presumptuous. You can't get that from the text. So don't read that into it. So even with that, it's very easy for us to get caught up into perceptions of things that aren't necessarily there. So going further into it, it is it's just, all right, yeah, here's Jesus, and clearly he knows something that's going on here. So let me just ask a question. And the response that Jesus gets, ultimately is, it's really none of your business. It's none of your concern. Jesus saith unto him, if I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? Follow thou me. And we're going to see this again in Acts chapter 1. What?
Just thinking Jesus saying it's none of your business, but he just told everyone Peter's business.
Right. And, hey, and that's Jesus' prerogative.
Yeah.
But as I was mentioning, you're going to see this again in Acts chapter 1 when they end up asking about restoring the kingdom. And Jesus says it's not for you to know the times or the seasons. So you just be patient and you just wait. And that's ultimately the response that's given here. Don't worry about what's going to happen to him. You follow me. What's going to happen to him is going to happen to him. What he's going to do is what he's going to do. But here are the things that you're going to do. So there's nothing wrong with asking. It's just the response is you just don't need to know that right now. And it has a further lesson for us as we move a little bit forward in breaking this down in application. But before we get to that, we have this statement being made. If I will that he tarry till I come. What is that to thee? Well, tarry till which coming? What's the coming?
80-70.
It's important to get this understood because it's going to cause a stir amongst the apostles in just a moment. And that I would argue, and Jesus is going to argue it as well, it has no connection to his final coming, because they're going to raise that very question. Well, this must mean he's not going to die. Jesus has to answer and say, I didn't say he wasn't going to die. I said, if he tarries till I come. And so we've already gone through with our Matthew study, and even throughout John, in discussing how there's more than one kind of coming that Jesus and God has in reference here, or throughout his teachings. And that this, in fact, would be a coming of judgment on the city of Jerusalem in AD 70. That this would have its connection in Matthew 24, and how that Matthew 24 records how that he, Christ, would come in the clouds, or the sign of his coming would be in his coming of the clouds of heaven. And all of that being a reference to judgment, just like it was in Isaiah's prophecy of God coming into Egypt to bring destruction on them. Now, setting that to the side, going back into the application here, how does this little conversation between Jesus and Peter about John bring some help into our age and into our time?
Well, I think it shows that basically each person is an individual, regardless of us here. So wherever we're at, whatever we're doing, we go about the things of God until we're done.
Okay. Nobody else? Nobody else is thinking this morning?
Tabitha looks like she has something.
I'll just add on to what Jamie said, we used to do the Lord's will and follow Christ.
Okay.
Hold on.
Just to tag on to what Jamie said, we're each to do the Lord's will and follow Christ.
My following the Lord is not based on what others do. Or better yet, is not based off of what others do not do. And that's more of the tendency of what people have. Well, this person's not doing it, so therefore I'm not going to do it. That what I'm doing, but then also it shares in the same idea, that what I'm doing does not need to be forced onto others. John is going to have his mission. Peter's going to have his. What happens when Paul comes on the scene? He's going to have his own mission also. But it's all being done for the cause of the kingdom. So, I'm hosting, Jordan's hosting, Reese is hosting YouTube broadcasts. So that means all y'all need to start up a YouTube channel. No, I don't need to force that on you, and then you don't need to look at it from that standpoint. Oh, well, this is what Micah is doing, then therefore I need to do this. If you want to do that, more power to you. But it's not a necessary thing. I'm involved in all these different groups, so that means you need to be in those groups. No. You can be involved in those groups, but if you want to go and get involved in other groups, then okay, you need to do that. Because while I'm over here in this group working, you're over here in another group working, and we're getting double the work done in two different areas. And so that's the situation that's going on here. If there's something that you see that you can do, go and do that, and don't worry about what this person is or isn't doing. Do what you can with what you got where you are. And things will get done.
Did you listen to my sermon?
No? Yeah, I did. But remember, I had this done before I went to Virginia, so.
We're all copying the same thing.
That's true. All got the same source material. And then Paul ends up giving that same illustration, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, 5 and 6. Who then is Paul and who is Apollos? But ministers by whom ye believed, even as the Lord gave to every man. I have planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. That's what's being settled here with this Peter and John situation. Well, okay, you've told me what's going to happen to me. I want to know what's going to happen to him. Don't worry about it. Be happy. And I'd be satisfied with that answer. Okay, good enough. At least I know what's going to happen to me. John still has to figure it out. The whole being isolated onto Patmos and everything like that, he doesn't see that coming. So, hey, you're in for a surprise there, buddy. These are different kinds of work being set towards the same aim. So just do what you can do. And put your best effort into it. And be happy with that.
Just thinking, I don't know if we went over this or not, or if it was a sermon I was listening to or a class I was listening to, but when Peter's in prison, did we already go over that? How he's asleep?
Yeah, I've mentioned it several times.
Yeah, okay. Just how he's asleep, just that calm. Yeah, it was you, okay. Just calm, just not worry about anything. You know, it's just, okay, this is my time. Like, just sitting there. Like, if it is my time, then it's my time. And just with that knowledge, you know, with the other apostles, is this my time?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and even in that situation, Peter could look at it from the standpoint of, okay, this isn't my time. Because the information is you're going to make it to old age. And you're not going to be able to get yourself around.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, okay, that's not this. So I've still got some time left. I'm going to get out of this. So that could be part of the explanation as to why he's catching up on his sleep. All right, then verse 23. A problem arises. Then went this saying abroad among the brethren, that disciple should not die. That is not what Jesus said. And yet look at how they're running away with something and running in a direction that Jesus never intended for it to go. Yet Jesus said not unto him, he shall not die, but if I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? We know that John did die. But even at this stage, it's being shown just how easy it is that if you're not taking into consideration all things that Jesus has said, you can start putting your own spin and your own interpretation onto something that wasn't even there. And we saw it earlier with the disciples back in our Matthew study. Beware the leaven of the Pharisees. Oh, well, he's saying that because we didn't bring any bread. It's not about the bread. So we have to make sure that while we're trying to bring our understanding into line with what God is actually saying, we just have to let Him say what it is that He is saying. And we have to properly understand the different elements that are in the context. So that's where the element of till I come is presented. Well, okay, if you guys are keeping track of what's being talked about, then you know there's a separate coming from what they would have in their minds here. And then in keeping that in mind, then you're not going to jump to that conclusion of, well, then John's just going to live forever. He's going to be another Enoch, and that God just took him, or another Elijah, and that he's not going to see death. It's like, nope, that's not what I said, so don't read into it. And that is a very good lesson for us as we move on into other epistles, in which, I mean, even going through our 1 Corinthians study that we did. There's a lot of things in there that people have the tendency of, okay, you're reading too much into this. 1 Corinthians 11 in the head covering, okay, you're reading way too much into this that's not there. And so people start building things off of that aren't intended. Now I'm going to leave that alone for now because I don't want to get too far into my sermon. Any questions or comments that you guys have on 23?
I don't think this is what the disciples are doing, but it's just one of those things to where you're trying to guilt someone into telling you what's going to happen. So to misrepresent what Jesus said so that he'll clarify. No, that's not what I said. He's going to die like this. So that's just where my mind was going with this. Like, oh, so he's just not going to die. And then, no, that's not what I'm saying. But, like, even if that was a trick, Jesus, that's not what I said.
Doing some fishing.
Yep. Trying to fish in for some details. But,
For some information.
But going with that, yeah, this is a perfect example of how this is how I interpret it. And then, but the interpretation's wrong. No, but this is what the Spirit's telling me that it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we see that Jesus doesn't let that happen.
Yeah.
He doesn't just let them have their own thoughts, their own interpretations, their own belief. He steps in and says, no, that's not what I said. Okay, anybody else? All right, 24, 25, this is the disciple which testifieth to these things and wrote these things, and we know that his testimony is true. And there are also many other things which Jesus did, the which, if they should be written every one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that should be written. Amen. So John gives us a special recording of the life of Christ that is very different from the other accounts. And again, it's being closed with the confirmation. All right, this is recorded and it's reliable. And as we've gone through our study of John, John's depiction in his setting forth of the Messiah, the Christ, the Savior, Jesus has been presented as the Passover lamb. John has kept record, timestamps, time record throughout his account of here's this Passover, here's this Passover, here's this Passover. But even though John is given a special account, he still fits in with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John's record, helping to prepare for what's going to take place in the book of Acts. So with that, we'll do some Acts intro.
Yay!
When we're considering the book of Acts, Acts is going to present many overviews that are spoken of in the Old Covenant. Now, when I'm going through this and I'm discussing these things from the standpoint of Old covenant, new covenant. I don't necessarily have an issue with the word testament. However, I don't think testament really brings about the full picture in people's minds that they should have. I mean, we understand the idea of, okay, we have a final will and testament, and it has authority and it's regulating, and you have to follow through with the agreements that are stated within it. But more commonly, and more times, the word covenant is used, especially in the Old Testament. I just did it because it's a habit. The word covenant is used during the older section of the scriptures, and because that's ultimately what it is. And a covenant is an agreement between two parties. It's a contract. So when you have that mentality about, okay, here's the old covenant and that it's an agreement and a contract between two parties, then you bring that over into the new, you're already setting the foundation to destroy the idea of faith alone. Because if I'm entering into contract with somebody, that means I have responsibilities and I have obligations. And the person that I'm entering into contract with has responsibilities and has obligations. Now, some might look at that and say, well, if that is the case, and that we're looking at this from contract and covenant, that I'm entering into this with God, where does grace come in? Well, God just has his responsibilities, I have my responsibilities, and we're working together. Where's the grace element? Where would it be?
The fact that God is offering the covenant.
God did not have to give us a contract.
Can we get him to say that again?
I don't know, you got to ask him.
You want to turn around and say it in the microphone?
The fact that he has to give a covenant to his people, that is the grace that is offered, that we are even allowed to be in a covenant relationship with God.
See, sword girls, that's how you speak
Yeah.
louder.
So just a taste of the these overviews that are coming from old covenant passages. Acts chapter 1, 15 and 16. So we're not even on the day of Pentecost yet. And in those days, Peter stood up in the midst of the disciples and said, the number of names together about 120. Men and brethren, this scripture must needs have been fulfilled, which the Holy Ghost by the mouth of David spake before concerning Judas, which was guide to them that took Jesus. Now, many are going to accuse the Church of Christ that we're just having the habit of, well, you just throw away the old covenant as soon as we get into the book of Acts. Well, number one, this is a false accusation because they misunderstand what our position is. The old covenant has limited authority on the lives of people today. But just because we believe that it has limited authority does not mean that you then just get to throw it away because of situations like this. If you don't know your Old Testament, if you don't know the Old Covenant passages, you're not going to understand what is now transitioning into the new. And especially as it's going to be used in the book of Acts. So then you drop down to verse 20 of this same section. For it is written in the book of Psalms, let his habitation be desolate, and let no man dwell therein, and his bishopric let another take. All right, so we know it's in the Psalms, but what chapter? What verse?
Well, I would cheat, so.
That's fine, if you got cross references.
69:25.
Okay, 69:25. Is that the only place?
No, Psalm 109:8.
Okay. Here are the two places where this is used in the Psalms. Let Psalm 69:25, let their habitation be desolate, let none dwell in their tents. Psalm 109 verse 8, let his days be few, and let another take his office. All right, that's where the quotations are from. What do those mean?
Something's being taken away.
Okay. Are you going to understand properly just by these two scriptures what's being talked about? All right, I'm seeing one no.
No.
Okay, two no's.
No.
Three no's. Why not?
Need context.
Okay, you've got to go back and read Psalm 69. You've got to go back and read Psalm 109. Now, why is it that Peter, in this situation, gathered together with the disciples, 120, and the other apostles? Why doesn't he go into a long quotation? Why doesn't he quote Psalm 69?
Because they know.
Okay. Peter can pull this out and make reference to it, and they are going to understand.
Wasn't that their common thing back then? Because that was just their way of a starting point to get people back to the whole by just quoting a small portion.
That and the fact that they are gathering together every Sabbath day, Acts 15, and they're gathering, well, synagogues came later, but on the Sabbath day, they're gathering together and they're reading the scriptures. So they're just in a continuous mode of having this being brought up in their hearing to where I can bring up, or Peter can bring up, well, here's this psalm, and they're going to be able to remember what the context is. Yes, Maddie?
I was just thinking that Peter's quoting the scripture, this is before they have the Holy Spirit.
Right.
So I'm just thinking of another argument I had a while ago with somebody,
Baptist friend.
a Baptist friend, that says that you need the Holy Spirit to understand the word. But here they understood their Old Testament or Old Covenant
Yeah.
to daily quote this.
Okay, that's good. That is good. And that goes to show that even though, yeah, they struggled with a lot of stuff, they're not completely hopeless in being able to put these things together. All right, so with all of that, in establishing how it is that Peter can use this in this audience and then be able to understand, that then means that if we're going to have a proper understanding about it, we will have to go back and read those Psalms. So as we're getting ready to go into our Acts study, you need to be reading ahead, and where you find references to Old Covenant scriptures, you need to go back and read those. Now, more than likely, we'll go through them in our class, but you need to go ahead and do it on your own so that you can have a good understanding of it before I indoctrinate you as to what my thoughts are.
Before you set us straight.
Yeah, exactly.
whatever you say.
Yeah, fix all your...
Any thoughts? Nope, that's not it. Nope, that's not
Yeah.
it. Nope, nope. 10 minutes later, yes, that's the one.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah.
No.
I've said many times, your answers are good, it's just not what I'm wanting.
We know.
That's so it's not that they're wrong, I just have something, I have a lane that I'm in,
Can
trying
we
to make
switch in the beginning God created to something else?
So you have that situation here. When we get over to Acts chapter 6 and then into chapter 7, Stephen's sermon is a lengthy history of Old Covenant Israel. So what do you need to have a handle on? You need to have a handle on Old Covenant Israel for that to have an impact. And just the very fact that in the Old Covenant, all of that is pointing towards this event. From Genesis 3:15, that sets the stage in pointing towards the coming Messiah and what it is that he's going to usher into the world so as to bring redemption. And not just to Israel, the nation, but to all mankind. The Old Covenant starts, Genesis 3:15 on that aspect, and then it closes. Malachi 3, beginning verse 1 through 3. Behold, I will send my messenger, and this speaking of John, the immerser, he shall prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple. And notice this, even the messenger of the covenant. Here is what Jesus was designed to bring in. Well, why is he bringing in a covenant? We're already in covenant with God. Because the covenant is changing. And John is getting you ready for that. Whom ye delight in, behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts. But who may abide the day of his coming, and who shall stand when he appeareth? For he is like a refiner's fire, and like fuller's soap. He shall sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. He shall purify the sons of Levi, purge them as gold and silver, that they may offer unto the Lord an offering in righteousness. There's a change coming. That's what this person does that's sitting down at the fire with silver. You're trying to get the impurities out of it so as to bring something new, something better out of that element. So when he shows up, do not expect things to just stay the same. And there again, we see how private interpretation steps in to blind people to what they should have been expecting. Why were the Pharisees so upset? Did they not have the scripture? No, they had it. They just either put something in there that God didn't want to be in there, or they just flat out ignored it and left it out. But if they had had this in mind, they would have recognized, okay, he's coming, and for sure he's coming, but things are not going to be as they are. He's coming to set us up with something new. What you got, Jamie?
Nothing.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just listening.
So we have the beginning of the Old Covenant, then we have the closing of the Old Covenant. That brings us to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These work as a bridge from that Old Covenant system over into the book of Acts, where the New Covenant is going to come into phase. And as you go through the gospel records, you have the different writers introducing the Messiah in different aspects and in different fashions. Matthew, we have the introduction of the spiritual king. Mark, we have the introduction of the spiritual kingdom. Luke, we have the introduction of Christ Jesus as the last Adam. And Luke's record of the genealogy of Christ is different from that of Matthew. Matthew goes back to Abraham, but Luke goes all the way back to Adam, and that Adam was a son of God. Here he is as the perfect man being entered into the world, and in 1 Corinthians 15:45, Paul writes about Jesus as being the last Adam. And then as we just conclude our study with John, John introduces the Passover lamb. Now these are the transition books. And this is important because many want to try and make the book of Acts that transition phase. You'll hear a lot of dispensationalist Baptists argue this way. And that when they come to the book of Acts, they see that as being, okay, here's where things are not actually changed, but this is where we're moving from changes. And we're going to show how that's not going to be the case. If you want to see the transition from the old covenant into the new, and that's what we just read with Malachi. I'm going to send my messenger, he's going to prepare the way. We're transitioning now with John and with Jesus. So you've had 3 years worth of transition. Now this is coming in. And it's going to have power and it's going to have authority. on what you're supposed to do. We have Acts opening with the apostles being told to wait. It's not only a matter of Acts opening that way, but that's also how that's how Luke closes. And it's very fitting that Luke would close that way and Acts would open that way because Luke is the author of both.
Wait, what?
Yeah. So in Luke 24, they're being commanded and told, okay, you tarry in Jerusalem. Because that's where this stuff is going to start. Now, this also serves as a picture of how the nation of Israel was supposed to be in waiting. They're waiting for their Messiah. They're waiting for their priest. They're waiting for their prophet who's going to bring redemption. But it's not the whole nation that's being told to wait. It's the apostles, it's the 120 before that day of Pentecost. And that's a fitting picture to what you have being described from Old Covenant prophecies. Throughout Isaiah, throughout Ezekiel, Jeremiah, you have a repeating message of there's going to be a remnant. What is a remnant? Huh? That's revenant. Huh? They're spelled different. Revenant? Remnant? What do you say, Carla?
Scrap or a small portion that's left over.
I still can't hear you.
A scrap or a small portion that's left over.
Okay.
For the microphone that didn't hear that, what did she say?
A scrap or small portion that's left over. And that's really only half of the definition. The other part of the definition is you have this scrap, this little section that's left over, but it's a scrap or little section left over from tribulation, through trial. And that with the remnant, it's a proper description of Israel going into bondage with Babylon, Medes and the Persians, and so on and so forth. And yes, they're coming back home, but you do not come back the same way that you went. It's almost like with the Holocaust or different terrible events that people put on their captives. They go in looking a certain way, but then they come out looking gaunt and just wasted away, beaten down. That's the full idea of the remnant.
So basically, the survivors.
Yeah. And so that's what you have going on here. Most people today, whether they are Jewish heritage or not, are still in this waiting phase. And for the Messiah to come back, well, in the denominational mind, the Messiah is returning, but with the Jews, Jesus wasn't the Messiah. They're still waiting for the Messiah. And that in his coming back and establishing his kingdom is going to be this glorious thing with the entire people, and they're going to rebuild the temple, and everything's going to return back like it was to David and Solomon. Now contrast that to what's going to happen on the day of Pentecost. Now in our minds, it's glorious. It's a wonderful event. But in the Jews' mind, how's that going to look?
Heresy, remnant.
Yeah, it's like Jesus coming in Jerusalem riding on the colt of an ass. This is our king? It's not what we expected. That's right, it's completely backwards. Here are these 12 Here are these Galileans. Here are these fishermen. And that's what's kicking this thing off. They're not going to like that. But it's very fitting for the kingdom, for the church to start like that. So we talked about his entrance into Jerusalem. Go back further from that and just look at the birth of the Savior. Wasn't born in a castle where he's going to automatically be able to step into his reign and his rule and his authority. He was born amongst a bunch of farm animals. Well, that's not a proper way for a king to come into the world. It is if you have the right view of the king. So now what about the establishment of his people, his kingdom, and his church? It's going to be the same form, the same fashion as to how he came into the world. And also when people are considering the book of Acts, and even for us, this is helpful in establishing certain points in our mind. We're needing to recognize Acts 2 is going to be the beginning of this new covenant. Now, according to the publisher of your Bible, when does the new covenant start? You have that page that divides Malachi and Matthew. And that page says New Testament. Well, people would be better served if they tore that from that section and then placed it in front of Acts chapter 2. Because technically, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are still part of the Old Covenant system. Paul writes about that in Galatians. Jesus was born of a woman. What? Under the law. And so much of what Jesus was involved in doing, the very fact that we're keeping Passover, like what we're doing, Feast of Booths that we discussed in John 5, the healing of the leper, but then saying to him, well, go and show yourself to the priest, according to what Moses has said. All of that is setting us up for, okay, we still haven't started what's coming yet. But when we get into the book of Acts and we get to Acts 2 on the day of Pentecost, everything starts looking back to that. To where Peter himself ends up saying, this is the beginning. Luke, in closing, in Luke 24, telling them to tarry in Jerusalem, then Jesus tells them what they're going to end up doing, and that is, well, you're going to take the message out, you're going to take the gospel. And what is significant about what Jesus says about their mission? Here's what you're going to do, and then he describes it. Before that.
Is it where it starts at?
Okay, beginning at Jerusalem. Now this is important because I think we've discussed this in classes in the past where I've mentioned in debates how our brethren have allowed themselves to get backed into a corner as to where do things actually start. And they'll go to Galatians and Ephesians and make reference to the fact, well, the law was nailed to the cross, therefore the new covenant starting at the crucifixion. It's not what the text says. So there again, we can allow, in order to try to answer something that's wrong, we can start pulling from something that's not properly being used to answer a question. Because for Luke to record twice, this is the beginning. The cross isn't the beginning. Let it say what it says. Okay, any thoughts on that? Kind of looks like it.
Why does that get us into trouble?
Because you have a starting time that isn't the starting time.
Why does the scripture say they were nailed to the cross?
Well, because it was nailed to the cross, but that doesn't mean,
Enact until.
yeah, right,
Or in some cases, 80, 70.
right. Yeah, it gets stretched out 40 years.
We've done broadcasts on this.
I thought so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the points was just like a will or a testament. You need to die for the will to be read at a certain time. It's not the day that you die that the will's read. It waits till a certain time.
Probate.
Yeah, for it to be established.
Yeah. And that's what you're going to have with the 40 days. Jesus is not done with his apostles yet. So, okay, we're setting this out. Luke records how that he opened their eyes and their understanding on certain things, and then he leaves. Now, it's time for it to start. Now, another important element in going through Acts, which we talked about in John, Acts is not an exhaustive historical record of the early church. Now, it's called the Acts of the Apostles, but once you get past Acts chapter 2, there's only going to be 4 apostles that are specifically mentioned. Or is it 5? Did I count wrong? Peter, James, John. Peter, James, John, Paul. Yeah. Huh? Different kind of apostle. But then 2 of them barely say anything or don't say anything at all. There's little record of James. I don't think John has any record of what he says. But then all the focus ends up shifting over to Peter, and then Paul comes in as a spokesperson. Now, does that mean that Peter and Paul just went around saying everything and these other guys didn't say anything? No.
Well, even on the day of Pentecost, when Peter gives a speech, they're all
Right.
talking.
He stood up with the 11.
But James gave a different lesson than Peter would.
Right.
Thank you for later.
So even with that, and as we've just gone through the discussion about Acts not being the transition from the Old Covenant to the New Covenant, Acts is going to work as a bridge to the epistles. So Peter, and showing the work that's being done there, Peter writes some epistles. Paul is going to write a lot of epistles. Peter's work is going to be aimed specifically at the Jews. Paul is going to be aimed with the Gentiles, but that's not exclusive, because both men are going to be involved in teaching different groups, or the 2 opposite groups. Peter's the first one to go to Gentiles, even though Paul is labeled as the apostle to the Gentiles. Luke is the author, and when we're thinking about that fact, there are many that believe Luke was a Gentile. Now, I don't think there's really a whole lot of substantial evidence to prove that point. One passage in particular that they will try to bring up is Colossians chapter 4, verses 10 through 14. Morning, come on in. And what takes place in Colossians chapter 4, verses 10 through 14, is you have a list of names that are given that are in connection with a Jewish group. And then you have Luke and another set of names that's used outside of that Jewish connection. So, could be, could not be. But let's just grant, for the sake of argument, that if it is true that Luke is a Gentile, then that would make Luke the only Gentile author for the New Testament. Why might that be significant?
If that is it, then both Luke and the book of Acts I've heard this before, that the book of Luke and the book of Acts have more scriptures than all of Paul's letters combined, which would be he's written more of the New Testament than a Jew would have,
Okay.
which was just something that I've heard. But
Okay. So why would that be significant?
because it's no longer the Jews, it's now neither Jew nor Gentile. So
Okay. So it would point more to the universal style of the book. And not just of the book, but of the gospel. That this is for Jew and Gentile alike. And we're going to see this unfold as we go further into the book. And twice in Galatians, Paul writes about that fact. There's neither Jew nor Greek, and he mentions how it is the case that circumcision avails nothing at this point. And even in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, you shall receive the power after the Holy Ghost has come upon you, shall be witnesses unto me both in Jerusalem and in all Judea, Samaria, and unto the uttermost part of the earth. So again, here's where it's going to start. Starts in Jerusalem, spreads out from there, goes into Samaria, which is a no man's land in the Jewish mind. But then it's going to go beyond that. So now you've gone into the Gentile phase. So as we mentioned, and we'll close with this thought about the transition from or being a bridge to the epistles. With the book of Acts, we have recorded the history of the church. Now, as I said, it's not an exhaustive history. It's just, it's focusing in on Paul's journeys, but even then, it's going to focus in on some peculiar cities. Ephesus, Corinth, Philippi, for that matter. But just imagine for a second, we didn't have the book of Acts. And you go from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you jump from John over to Romans. And just how confusing that would be. You're not going to understand what Romans is dealing with if you're not first dealing with Acts in its proper place. Where did the church at Rome even come from? Acts tells us that. Acts chapter 2, there's strangers from Rome that are hearing Peter preach this sermon. And some of them are going to obey the gospel, and they're going to take that back with them to Rome. And there we have the church beginning. We have their salvation account taking place there in Acts chapter 2. And it's not even just Romans. You wouldn't know anything about Corinth, Acts 18. The Ephesians, Acts 19. Where are they coming from, or any of the other epistles? And you get over to Romans 16:16, the end of it, salute one another with a holy kiss, the churches of Christ salute you. Well, what do you mean the churches of Christ? Who's that? This is tying together the gospel record. Now, as I'm saying, imagine doing this, a lot of our denominational friends, they do not even have to imagine doing this. This is how they do it. They want to skip over completely the book of Acts and start running over to the book of Romans and just, you need to read this so as to learn how to be saved. No, that's not what Romans is for. Or that's not the purpose of Romans. The purpose of Romans is you have people that are already saved, a church is already established, and there is a problem in Rome. And Paul is writing to deal with that problem. So in Matthew 16, verse 18, we have Jesus saying, "I say also unto thee, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." All right, we see that happening. We see that building take place in the book of Acts. You jump to these letters, the church is already there. Where'd it come from? You've got to know Acts. 1 Corinthians 1:2, unto the church of God which is at Corinth. Well, where'd they come from? Acts helps us to see Matthew 16 become a reality. Here's where it's promised. Here's where the promise is fulfilled. And as we said, the epistles are written to deal with problems that the churches are having. Well, they're written either to deal with problems or to simply encourage the churches. There are some churches that Paul wrote to, they didn't have any problems. Wouldn't it be nice to be a part of them? But those churches were started in the book of Acts. You're not going to know where they came from or how they came into existence. And one of the major problems that's being dealt with throughout the epistles is the relationship between the Jews and the Gentiles. If we did not have the book of Acts, there's going to be a great deal of understanding this problem. But Acts explains it. So why is it that we have today so much debate and so much arguing that takes place with our religious friends over the issue of works and the issue of the law? Now, come on in. You're all right. But it's Sunday. Man, where was I?
Works.
Yeah. Why our denominational friends have so much issue with works, law, and obedience. It's because they're not starting with the book of Acts to set the stage and the foundation with what was the problem that the early church was having. How are we supposed to bring Jew and Gentile together? Well, what's causing the division? The law. All law? No. The law. We are battling against the law of Moses here. Circumcision. Feast days. Sabbath days. Yes, ma'am. No, what you got?
No,
Oh.
No, I'm just listening.
Okay. Well, your mouth open like you're about to expound. So Acts explains all of this problem, starting with the Jews. They come in first. Then the Samaritans are brought in, Acts chapter 8. Then there's drama about Cornelius and his house in Acts chapter 10. Acts 15. Well, even before you get to 15, Acts 11. Peter is called on the carpet. You went into a Gentile's house and ate with him. There is the snake raising its ugly head. So then everything that Paul ends up going through and writing about, for example, in the Galatian letter and the Ephesian letter, about how that we're saved by faith and we're saved by grace, not of works. What works? What's the problem? The law of Moses. There's your works that we're talking about. Throughout the Roman letter, what's the main aim that Paul has his eyes set on as he's writing to those brethren? It's the law of Moses. There's so much discussion about circumcision throughout the Roman letter, how anybody could read that and to think that, well, yeah, Paul is just talking about all law. You are out of your mind. And it's not only a thing of being out of the mind, it's just the fact you're not starting at the proper place. You're not starting at the beginning. So if you start at the beginning, all that's going to be helped. Acts is going to help to understand Romans, understanding Galatians, understanding Ephesians. So we'll save some of this. Yeah, we'll save the rest of this for next time. And this is dealing more heavily into the beginning aspects of the book. And again, how people want to try to jump to Romans. Well, yeah, this is where you need to go to find out how to be saved. No. Or They want to go before the book of Acts. And they want to start going to the thief on the cross. Well, that's where you need to go for salvation. No. Here's the beginning for all things for us. All things Christianity begins day of Pentecost. So if you're wanting to know what you're needing to do to be saved as a Christian, that's where you start. And to jump anywhere else, you're getting way ahead of yourself. And you're not going to have an idea as to where you're going.
Question for long ago, you made this statement. Some people will accuse us of taking the Old Testament completely out. Who are those people?
Pretty much everybody.
Pretty much everybody?
Yeah. Because it's funny that with our denominational friends and how much they despise law keeping, but if you were to ask them, well, what would I need to do to be pleasing in God's sight? What's their answer going to be?
Faith alone, by grace alone?
No.
What?
Well, if you follow the there you go. If you follow the Ten Commandments, it's just like that's law. But that ends up being their go-to. And so, like right there is just another prime example of, okay, you guys don't even know where you're heading. Not even a matter of you don't even know where you're heading. You don't know where you stand, number one. And so then when they hear us say that the old law doesn't have the kind of authority over us, it just sends them into a panic. And much like what we just talked about in John 21 about, well, if he tarries till I come, what is that to you? Well, that means he's not going to die. And they hear us say that, and they just say, oh, well, you must just throw it out. Like, I didn't say that. It's there. I need it. And there are some things that are still authoritative. And we'll deal with some of that in the book of Acts. But as far as going back to that old covenant system, so as to be pleasing in God's sight, I don't have to do that stuff. So yeah, it's pretty much everybody around us. If they know anything about us, that's what they'll say about us. Okay, any thoughts, questions? No hands, so we will stop there. We have just a touch bit more of introduction to go through, and then we should be able to get into chapter 1 next week.